as I like to say, old me in my old kitchen. I'm being assisted today by my husband, possibly reluctantly, I'm not sure. He's in the back and I've been fussing at him. We're going to do 4 recipes tonight, and the theme is healthy comfort cooking. My thoughts were, we have just come out of the holidays, and when I, as a dietitian, look back on the holidays, I think of sort of the celebration foods that we all look forward to. And I thought of some things that should really be welcomed to our table to keep life simple, but to definitely enjoy what we're having. So if you don't mind, Barbara, put the PowerPoint up and let me just go through some of the points there, and then we can go back if needed.
Okay, and
Barbara, have you put the recording on?
yes, I did.
Thank you.
Have faith. There we go.
So cooking healthy comfort food, and again, as I said, my thoughts are all the things that we look back on, the foods we look forward to. So my first recipe, as you'll see on the slide, of the 4 recipes, the first one I'm going to do. Oh, yep, keep on. I'm going to start with the black bean brownies. That way I want to convince you that it's possible to actually eat brownies that taste good, they're chewy, they're moist, but they have no flour. And in fact, it's not that flour is so bad, but that the beans are really good, healthy food. And I bet you never imagined you'd make brownies with black beans. The recipe above that one is carrots. So the idea is something surprising for your dinner menu, where carrots are either peas and carrots, or they're boiled carrots, or carrots in a stew. Well, these are roasted carrots, so simple. And if you have the oven on for something else, you're saving energy by cooking 2 things together. And Barbara, if you could go backwards to the slide before that. The recipe that I will do last is called homemade turkey apple sausage. And this is a fave in my household. For each of these, I have the final recipes all prepared, so you can see what they look like finished, as well as you'll watch me put them together. So Barbara, go backwards again. Let me just see where the sequence is. Okay, backwards some more. A little more. Okay, so the first recipe I'll be doing is the black bean brownies. The second recipe I'll be showing is what I call something fairly simple but very fast to put on your lunch menu, and that would be a tortellini soup. And the last recipe is going to be the sausage. So let's get started. I'm going to go now back to live me. Put my recipe in front. Black bean brownies. So recipe ingredients are very straightforward. We're going to start off with a can of black beans. And the black beans have been rinsed and drained. So most of you know, let me bring my ingredients over. I always encourage people to have beans, if you're having beans from the can, to not rinse them, because part of the goodness of beans is their soluble fiber, and some of that soluble fiber actually goes into the liquid that's in the bean. But in this case, it's okay. And in fact, if you drain your beans and you want to use what you drained away for something else. But here I have 1 10-ounce can of beans. This one is, I'm not promoting any brand name, but it's from Target. Into your food processor. And in with that goes 1/4 of a cup of chocolate chips. I purchased dark chocolate. You could do semi-sweet, you could do sweet. And to me, the more interesting chocolate flavor comes from the bittersweet. Here are 1/4 of a cup of the chocolate bits. I also keep mine in the freezer, just because I think they'll stay fresher longer. So my instructions say that we should start putting the beans, 1/4 of a cup of chocolate chips, and 3 tablespoons of canola oil into our food processor until it's smooth. So here's my canola oil, and 3 tablespoons is actually a little bit shy of 1/4 of a cup. So I'm going to use the same measuring to go just a little bit less than that. into my food processor, and it's gonna make a fair amount of noise, but you know, that's what food processors do. After it has blended and become smooth, I will then add sugar, vanilla, cocoa, and the recipe calls for brown sugar. I don't keep brown sugar in the house because it always gets hard. So you might already know that you can fake your or kind of hack your own brown sugar by adding a small amount of molasses to white sugar, and you get the brown sugar taste. And it also calls for 3 eggs. I'm going to add those in just a moment. When those are all blended together, we put them into a pan which is lined with parchment paper, which I pre-cut, and that goes into a 350-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes. So here goes. Hold your ears. So of course with a food processor, things start to clump up, go in one direction. So let me pass this over to my assistant. May I? Thank you. I'm just pushing everything down because you may get a couple of little beans that try to hide under the blade. And of course, if you come up with a bean, it's not the end of the world. You just want it to be as smooth as possible. Here goes one more. So now I'm going to add in my 3 eggs, according to the recipe. The 3 eggs also comes with 2/3 of a cup of brown sugar. So here is a 1/3 measure. I'm going to do 2 1/3 measures of white sugar. 1, 2. And now I'm going to add just a teaspoon or a little bit of a drizzle of molasses to give it a brown sugar texture. You good? It's good. Suppose you didn't have molasses and you don't have brown sugar, so use white sugar. It's okay. Recipe now calls for a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Don't read my label carefully. It's imitation vanilla. But trust me, you will not pound on my front door and say, I can tell the difference. Because if you can, bring the vanilla extract with you. All right, next one. We're going to put in a 1/2 of a cup of cocoa. Now, just to keep things neat, because this is kind of dusty, I measured the 1/2 cup into the container. So I'm going to just pour the whole thing out. And to that, we are now adding a 1/2 of a teaspoon of baking powder. Here's baking powder. There are some substitutes for baking powder. If you just wake up in the middle of the night, you really feel like cooking, but it's a matter of adding an acid and an alkaline, or an acid and a base together. So here's my 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and it calls for 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. And I asked myself, what's the point of an 1/8 of a teaspoon of liquid? It can be a little bit of a texture difference as well as a very slight flavor difference. And now we're going to put back into the food processor until everything is well blended. We have a total now of 1 10-ounce can of black beans, which have been drained, a 1/4 of a cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. We have added our 3 eggs. We've added our 3 tablespoons of canola oil. Yes, we did. Right? We have added our 2/3 cup of brown sugar, or actually white sugar with a little molasses, and we've added our 1/2 cup of baking cocoa, our teaspoon of vanilla, our 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and our 1/8 teaspoon of salt. And we are creating magic. Let's see if I can hold this where you can get a peek of the mushy blended beans and eggs and cocoa that's happening. I'm going to give it a little more. Let me give it a couple of little scrapes. A couple little scrapes so there's none of those little beans hiding under the blade. And back to the food processor. Here goes the last one. How many seconds was that? Just a few. Taking as much of this magic goodness out of it here as possible. Pouring it into my 8-inch square pan that has been lined with parchment paper. Just like my old kitchen, an old food processor that really likes for you to sort of nurture it a little bit. Well, let me just pour the whole thing in instead of taking too much time here. And I'll take the rest out gradually with the use of the rubber scraper. And what you're going to do at the end is add another 1/4 of a cup of the bittersweet chocolate chips to the top of the, I'm trying to get the blade out, here it comes, the top of the mix before it goes into the oven. I'm moving this over. And now the rest of the liquid goes into the pan, again, 8-inch square lined with parchment. Putting all of that in. Maybe a little left behind in the interest of time. Putting the extra 1/4 cup of chocolate chips on top. Why don't you do it by eyeball? Just a few on the top, like so. Sprinkle them liberally, but as far apart as you can, into the oven. What comes out?
Question here for you is what do you do if you don't have a food processor?
I would use a strainer, like what we strain the. I have that strainer back. So this is what I strained black beans in. I would simply push them through a strainer. It's going to be a pain in the neck. Probably a potato masher for a bit, and then push it through because you want to get the pieces as non-beany as possible. But I don't think it has to be pureed necessarily. I'm wondering, could you actually try to get it through in a blender? I'm going to take a moment to clean my fingers. And I'm going to show you what the brownies look like when they come out. And I have proof that they taste good. Right. I'm going to get closer so that you can see the texture. They're very moist, they're very firm, and they're very chocolatey. Who wants to take a bite? Come on over. Right. So we have our first recipe, the black bean brownies. This is great for someone who might have celiac disease and therefore cannot eat wheat. It isn't necessarily vegan because it does have eggs, but if one wanted to do even vegan, you could use a vegan egg substitute. So recipe number 1, let's go on to recipe number 2.
Oh.
Recipe number 2 is the tortellini simple soup. Now, what happens in the winter, there's nothing more appealing than a bowl of hot soup when the temperature drops, and the faster you can make it, the more nourishing and satisfying it is, the better. So I'm going to use an ordinary old pot. The recipe says, optionally, that you could use, dice up some fresh onion, dice up fresh garlic, but I'm really about doing this as fast as possible, but still with good ingredients. So I'm going to do the easy way. First, it calls for a tablespoon of olive oil. So in my pot, I beat up old pot, roughly a tablespoon of olive oil. So you'll say, well, if you're not going to dice and brown or soften garlic and onions, what's the olive oil for? Well, it does give a modest amount of flavor. And fat also helps you absorb your fat-soluble vitamins, and some of the ingredients in the soup are fat-soluble. So here's the next ingredient. You want, I will add onion powder and garlic powder to my my soup, because again, I'm emphasizing today fast, delicious, and nutritious. The rest of the ingredients include either 2 cups of fresh sliced carrots or a can of carrots. So here we go. a can of sliced carrots. Just let me open it and pop it in because it's all about the proof that this is a fast and delicious soup. It also calls for 4 cups of vegetable broth, and then it calls for 1 can of diced tomatoes or fresh tomato. So it says to strain your carrots and tomatoes. But if it asks for 4 cups of vegetable broth, I think of the fluid in the can as being part of that broth. So here's 1 can of tomatoes. Here's 1 can of carrots. The recipe then calls for 1 9-ounce package of refrigerated cheese tortellini. And I have used, here's a 19-ounce package that I measured out so that this would be a 9-ounce. In other words, I took roughly half out. Here's the cheese tortellini. This one was frozen, but you can also buy them fresh. Fresh as well as refrigerated. This one is stovetop or microwave ready. So in my pot so far, I have the tortellini, the carrots, the tomatoes. It then calls for, and again, these are optional, a 9-ounce package of 2 cups of fresh spinach or a package of frozen thawed spinach. So scissors are right here. Of course, I have the frozen wet thawed spinach. So that I did thaw is so that it's faster. And finally, it says to add Italian seasoning. So I'd like to go to the PowerPoint for a moment. Is there a question? Okay, Barbara, if you go to the PowerPoint.
I only saw one picture. Okay, if they don't have many, if it's only those 2, that's okay.
Are you talking to us? All right, hold on, let me, I'm going to, open it and,
So you're going to go to the
In the
PowerPoint.
front, like in the,
Barbara?
when you walk into the store, they have all the fruit.
are you talking to, all
Are
right,
you talking about the recipe?
Yeah, no, okay, let's skip it, that's fine.
okay.
Okay, so.
No, it's called Fig Newtons.
Hey, could you please,
It's a
oh,
box of cookies. It's a box, it's, I don't know where they keep the boxes of cookies.
Okay, so we're either being Zoom bombed or someone doesn't realize she's not muted.
No, that
Yeah.
was, I was talking into the phone and I said Fig Newtons and it came out that crazy thing. Okay, if you
well,
can
hold on
find
a
it.
second. I'm gonna mute
Okay,
everybody and then I'll come
thanks.
back to you. Oops.
Okay, Barbara?
Yeah, hold on. Okay. All right. Unmute yourself. Oop. Maudene?
Okay, did I unmute myself okay?
Yes, you did. Sorry, it was I couldn't figure out, I couldn't.
How's
unmute.
that? Is that better?
Right, we're good. We're all good.
Okay, so if you could go to the next slide for me. So there should be a slide with a recipe for Italian seasoning. Next one. Next one.
There we
Next,
go.
here, okay, so a recipe that calls for Italian seasoning. You can, of course, buy the jar of Italian seasoning in the supermarket, but there's so many blends that are called Italian seasoning that I'm kind of going to wing it here. And I chose these 2 images because they show sort of comparative amounts. It looks like basil comes as the highest proportion of leafy, dried leaf. Oregano, thyme, and marjoram are about the same. Rosemary about the same. And then some get even sassier and throw in red pepper flakes and garlic powder. So what I'm going to do for my Italian seasoning in my quick and furious soup, which by the way still needs the vegetable broth, I'm going to add some parsley flakes. I'm going to add some basil, and we can go back to the live demo now, Barbara. I'm adding some whole oregano. Yeah, I'm winging it. I mentioned earlier that I was going to use a little bit of onion powder because I didn't take the time to do a fresh onion, and a little bit of garlic powder. And you'll find when you make it for yourself, for your family, some people like a lot of one or less of the other. And of course, salt and pepper. I could get sassy and show you freshly ground black pepper. But who's kidding who here? This is just the hardcore stuff right out of the can. And salt. So I'm going to throw in a tiny bit of salt. But remember, if this one is using canned vegetables, which have a little sodium, it's also using a vegetable broth. And the recipe calls for 4 cups of broth. Approximately 1 cup of broth has gone into the recipe from the liquid in the can. So I'm going to use the equivalent of 1 more can of broth. And since we know that most cans are approximately 14 ounces, that's like a little shy of 3 cups. Let's see how it looks. Okay, this will now go to the stove. And I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to get a little closer so that you can see the, see the ingredients. All right, the carrots, the tomatoes, the spinach, which is thawed, chopped spinach, and the tortellini. Going to put it on the stove. This will be ready in 10 minutes.
No, it's not. Usually when I do tortellini, I always cook the tortellini first. It's not in, you don't need to cook start boiling ahead of time.
This one on the instructions tells us that it can be microwaved and cooked inside of 3 minutes on high.
Okay.
So the most important thing is the blending of the flavors. Okay, of course, I have one that's all finished. Here it comes in all its glory. Again, because the table gets very messy from the prep, I'm going to dress it with a napkin. And here's my tortellini, fully prepared in a casserole. And here are 2 bowls begging to be filled. And here is a ladle. And of course, the final touch is to mix your tortellini up so everybody gets a reasonable amount. Put it into your serving dish, and then grate fresh Parmesan cheese on it. And that's some good eating, y'all, and I promise you it's for 10 minutes. Okay. Who wants to come take a bite? Ring my bell, and it's waiting for you. All right. We're now going to go on for our 3rd recipe. Unless there's any questions so far about the black bean brownies and the tortellini soup. Can you see any questions, Barbara?
Yep, not at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to move this off camera.
Oh, could you just go over the, how long you do the brownies and at what number in the oven?
The brownies bake at 350 for 20 to 25 minutes.
Thank
And
you.
you can tell when they're ready because the top looks cracked. Okay. So one of the things that I always get nervous about when I have brownies or cookies in the oven is am I underbaking or overbaking? And I have to remember that when it comes out of the oven, it's still very hot. There's a fair amount of baking that's going to continue for another 4 to 5 minutes. So if you take it out when it looks done, it might get a little beyond that. Some people like that sort of extra cooked flavor, like a brownies that are a little dark on the bottom or cookies that are dark on the bottom. Okay, next recipe. Questions so far? Okay, our next recipe is going to be the carrots. Carrots are extraordinarily healthy foods. And there's so many varieties. I don't even have a word to tell you that there are 50 varieties of carrots. The ones we call baby carrots, of course, are really mature carrots that are grown for their high sugar or sweeter texture and sweeter flavor. And then they're lathed into little shapes. But there are lots of varieties, and all of them are superstars, nutritionally speaking. As I mentioned before, vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin, and fat improves the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So that small amount of olive oil that went into the pot, even without sauteing onions and garlic, is still going to help with the body's utilizing all the wonderful nutrients that are in that soup. So let me switch over to the next one, which is the carrots. It's lemon thyme. I think, Barbara, if you could go to the PowerPoint, the recipe will be there for a moment.
Okay, sure.
So it's lemon thyme roasted garlic, carrots. All right, so I brought along, or rather I got ready, an ordinary bag of carrots. It's actually a half a bag. Oh, actually you can. I'll read the different directions and instructions. And
You want me to stop sharing?
Pardon?
Stop sharing or stay?
Oh, you can leave it on for a second. I'll read through it with the group. So it's a pound of whole fresh carrots, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. It says extra virgin. I get what, appeals to me that day. 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And it says that's equal to about the juice of a half of a lemon. Several stems of fresh thyme. I'm going to use dried thyme. And then salt and pepper to taste. And now if you would go back to live.
Okay. Oh, yes, Susan, yes. Will the recipes be forwarded to us? Yes, we'll be posting them and we can email them.
Okay. So I could, of course, scrape all these carrots ahead of time. But then it's not a cooking demonstration, and I don't think I could be as convincing as to how simple and straightforward this recipe is. So here's the deal. Without my sink, I'm going to rinse and cut. And when I say rinse, I don't know about you, when I scrape carrots, it seems like I always have, no matter how well I wash them ahead of time. My hands still feel a tiny bit gritty, and the carrots still feel just a little bit like they need to be washed. I know many people who simply scrub the skins and go on about it, and I always take the scrapings and I put them in my compost. So this is one down, and I already did a half of the bag, so here goes the second half. Anybody have their own style of grading? I grade away from me. Some people like to grade towards themselves. Anybody have a grading story? Don't tell me about knuckles. We all have a knuckle story.
So, well, I scrape away and I peel towards.
Oh, that's curious.
Yeah.
I think I do too. Yeah, the potato, I peel it towards me. Yes.
Yeah. So, I have a question here. What other herb or herbs would you recommend if thyme is not available?
Every and any. In other words, some people, I don't like rosemary. So if the recipe calls for rosemary, I just leave it out and I'll just be unhappy. But that would be an excellent substitute if you like rosemary. You could even use an herb infused olive oil. That can give you some of the sort of flavors that we're after here. The simplicity of this recipe is what I like. Yes, no, in this case, we cannot use a canned carrot. But look, I'm already almost finished scraping all the carrots. And again, I'm going to, after I scrape them, slice them very briefly in half, and then coat them with olive oil, with thyme, with some lemon juice, pop them in an oven in a baking dish or like a cookie sheet with a little olive oil and lemon juice, lining it with aluminum foil because that, well, keeps you from having to do a lot more dishes in the end. But if you don't want to use aluminum foil, you just want to use your baking sheet surface, there's certainly no reason not to. Okay, so all my carrots are grated. I'm going to just give each one a little bit of a rinse because again, they always feel like maybe my hands need a bit of extra this, and then I'm going to cut them. The cutting part is painless. Here we go. Taking off the tips. You don't have to, but I do. And here we are. They've been just simple little strips. And these will go on a baking sheet. The baking sheet is here. I'm going to give it a fresh sheet of aluminum foil. Oh, that's the parchment. That's the parchment over here. Here we go, fresh sheet of foil. And I'm stingy with my foil. And I'll wrap it around 4 times. It's a non-renewable resource at this point. So here go the carrots. I'm going to stretch them in a single layer out on the baking sheet. One more, and is anybody timing me? I think we barely hit 5 minutes on this one. And once again, I'm just cutting them down the middle and then down the, giving them a flat side. And I'm fairly fussy about using a knife. I've had some experience with chefs and going to workshops. I like having a knife that, remember they say you make more mistakes with a dull knife than you do with a sharp one. So definitely do what you have to do to keep your knives in good condition. I also know you have a chef's knife and you have a cleaver. You have a lot of different varieties. I've just gotten used to my cleaver over the last 1.5 years, and this is the thing I like to handle, the feel of, and I feel like when I have this, I'm cooking with gas. So here are our carrots all lined up, and now I will very simply drizzle them with some olive oil, then drizzle them with some lemon juice, sprinkle on salt and pepper and thyme, and pop them in an oven at approximately 400 degrees. And they don't take long. There's not very much olive oil there either, because you don't have to go crazy. So no matter how much I try, I can't catch all the seeds, and so I do my squeeze through a little strainer here, and even a seed gets through. If you want to get more juice out of your lemon, you probably already know you can roll the lemon on the counter, which I probably should have done, but you got the idea. And then salt and pepper, and then we'll do the thyme. And this is to taste. Not necessarily, so it's not often required, but it does give everything a touch more of a moment. Here's the thyme. There are many people who say when an herb has been on your shelf for more than a year, you should throw it away. They haven't met me because I don't throw anything away, but possibly it's better to have fresh herbs, and I didn't have fresh thyme, but my dried thyme just fine. Here I am mixing them together, and they will go halfway through. It's a good idea to flip them over just to make sure that the savory crust of the carrot against the surface of the foil is on both sides of the carrot. So here we are. It's about to go in the oven. I'm going to put my hands in my soapy water. And pop it in, and then I'll show you some of the prepared lemon. Once again.
Maudene, why foil for some baking and parchment for other?
Parchment was for the brownies, because things really do release from the pan with parchment, almost like magic. I'm new to parchment paper. I used to think, who needs all that fussy stuff? You know, what was good enough for my grandma just to use some grease on the bottom of the pan. Parchment is a game changer.
But you use that for baking specifically, and the other you use the foil?
Right,
Okay.
I used to bake the parchment for like at the bottom of a cake pan, having had too many teary moments when I thought I was getting a cake out of a cake pan and some of it stayed behind. I'm a believer. So here are what our carrots will look like when they come out of the oven. And when you think of a burned carrot, you think, oh, it's going to be bitter, but actually it's sweeter because the natural sucrose in the carrot has become caramelized, and it's really wonderful. So this is what a half of a bag of carrots will look like when it's finished at 400 degrees with the lemon, the thyme, salt and pepper, and olive oil. And now for our last recipe, we're going to make homemade fresh ground turkey apple sage sausage. All those words together just make your mouth drool, right? Okay, here we go. If you would, Barbara, show me the recipe for the turkey.
Sure.
Turkey sausage.
There's the carrots. Oh, I like that thing. Carrot museum.
So I have, this is my, by saying all the wonderful things about carrots, all the various nutrients that they're rich in. They come in so many different colors and textures. It's something you really don't want to miss if you don't have to. And there should be another slide talking about the attributes of cocoa or dark chocolate. So I think that one comes here. Yes. And if you wonder, are these things made up by the people that sell chocolate? No, they are actually based on research. It's called evidence-based science. You can't make a mistake with dark cocoa. Now, milk chocolate, Snickers bars, I can't say good things about those. They just taste good. They're fun. But I'm not sure we can come up with polyphenols and the effort to save our heart condition by eating Snickers. Okay, are we ready to start with our recipe for homemade?
Why did I miss that? Oh, you're looking for which recipe? You're
I
looking
think
for.
it might be the first one.
There you go.
Okay.
And I'll just, there. Nope. Why is it doing
So
that to
we
me?
have,
I apologize. We're having technical difficulties. There we
nah,
go.
we're not. We're doing fine. So I have here well, let's see, we're gonna go over the recipe with you. There are a lot of different ways to peel this banana. So if you find one that looks a little different, there aren't gonna be but terribly much different. After you've made it the first time, you may say, I think I want more sage or less sage or more red pepper flakes or less. So it's really going to be very customized after your first time. So the recipe says to start with 1 pound of lean ground turkey. Could also be ground beef. Could also be ground pork. It's really ground meat, but in this case I use turkey. 1/2 to 1 cup of finely minced apple, and that turns out to be about 1 apple. 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. I've got to tell you, I like to go heavier than that. Also calls for paprika, sage, fennel, salt, pepper, and I add wheat bran because I'm a dietitian and everything needs a little more fiber. Okay, let's go back live. And I'm starting with the 1 pound of freshly ground turkey. If I say fresh, I'd say I bought it last week when we were supposed to do the demo. So it's been frozen, but it was freshly ground that day. Okay, and that goes into a container. And I use this plastic as many times as I can until I get complaints from my family. Mom, put the plastic in the recycle. Okay, the next thing that goes in is the diced apple. So here are some bits of apple that I was using earlier, and calls for 1/2 to 1 cup. And the diced apple is just meaning that it should be as finely diced as possible. When you end up cooking your sausage in a skillet, you're essentially cooking your apple too. So the smaller the apple, the easier it'll cook, and you'll get a nice smooth moistness from it as opposed to something that kind of bites back. And if you don't, you know, like I say, how do you know you're doing a half a cup versus a cup of apple? Well, if you put your palms together and then you move your fingers at 90 degrees to each other, mind you, the palms are touching, the fingers are 90 degrees. The volume of the space in your hand, for most of us, is about a half a cup. So when you have your apples finely diced, if you can pull together the equivalent of something to fill that little space in the palms of your hand, that's about a half a cup.
Question here is, do you peel the apple?
I don't. And that's not for any special reason. I do wash the peel with soap and water. And that's not because I think that mostly I hear in the back of my head my sister-in-law saying, I don't know where his hands were. The person who put the apples in the bag.
I got the raspberries.
So I'm mostly washing that. But apples, almost all the apples we get are coated in some wax because most of the apples we get are really harvested in a specific season and they're in cold storage. So you're getting them all year long, but they didn't come off the tree last week. And that wax is considered benign for humans. And there's natural wax on the outside of an apple. So if you do pull an apple off a tree and you rub it on your sleeve, it'll be shiny because you just polished the natural wax. So wax is basically keeping the moisture in the apple from escaping through the pores, and that causes the apple to deteriorate. Okay, so here is a little more than a half a cup. Bam, right? I don't need to start with another apple. So another reason why I don't peel an apple, takes more time. Okay. Now I don't have dried sage, but I do have a plant that is essentially, I can cut the leaves off the plant almost all year. In the summer, the leaves are much more, they're fatter and fluffier, but here in the near winter, they are still very flavorful. And if you crush one and then hold it to your nose, you really do get a good sagey effect. Most people think of sage in two things. One is turkey dressing, turkey stuffing, and the other is sausage. I gotta confess, I'm one of those people. I don't know when I've ever used sage other than making stuffing and making sausage. Anybody else have a sage experience? Okay, now the next thing it calls for is crushed fennel. So I'm gonna put the sage down in here and pull out the fennel. So the fennel seeds are quite hard, and if you've seen them in lots of different foods, they are sort of oval shaped, and they have that bouquet of licorice. So it asks for 1/4 of a teaspoon of crushed fennel. If you have a pestle and mortar, that's the best thing. I probably have one. I don't know where on earth it is. So I do the old school thing, which is to just kind of mash it against the surface and then very carefully kind of corral it and try to mince it this way. Once again, when it's in the part of the blend of the flavorings in the sausage, you might come across a reasonably hard part, but nothing that's going to be painful or unpleasant. Okay, there's my fennel. And again, the mortar and the pestle would be better, but I'm making a case for it, kept keeping it simple. It also wants to use Italian seasoning. We're back to Italian seasoning. So I'm going to wing it. Throw in a little parsley flake or two. I'm going to put in a little oregano. I'm going to put in some red pepper flakes. I'm going to add some paprika, some black pepper. By the way, I'm a big fan of black pepper. A little more. Some salt, some garlic powder, and basil. Here's our basil. And the final thing we're going to do is to mash this together, blend it nice and smoothly so that there's no mouthful that's gonna have too much of one thing. Here's the red pepper flakes. And here's my final magic piece.
Can you use Bell's Poultry Season? That's what I use in my stuffing from Ship.
I would, yes, happily. I add bran. Where's the bran? Ah, this big bag back here. So the bran is really not part of the flavor. It's just sort of a nutritional boost, and I might use 2 tablespoons. So that might be just enough not to feel as though you're being punished for eating sausage. Smush it all together, making sure I'm going to review the ingredients with you, and you can see the blend. I'm going to come closer to the camera so that you can see the sage, the red pepper flakes, the fennel, all of it's going together. And this is the reason why I kept it for the last, is because I really have to go up to my elbows in it and make the patties. So the instructions say to use wet hands to make the patties. And that's because they really do stick to you. And put the patties directly into a skillet. So I'm going to put my skillet to the side. And I have water for my wet hands. And you're going to do smallish patties because they cook faster. And like now, even if I cook, let's say 8 of these, there's going to be lots more left over. I will take a skillet and put oil in the bottom, probably canola oil, just enough to cover the bottom, get it hot to the point where the oil is shimmering, and that way they will start to cook and form a little crust immediately. And if I don't cook all of these today, I can put them on a layer in some sort of a recycled pan, recycled container, put them in my freezer, and then take them out patties, 2 or 3 or 4 patties as needed. So you're watching me form the patties now, and it will be much easier if your hands are a little bit wet. And then I'm going to put the patties on the stove, give you an idea how big I'm making them, and then show you some cooked final ones after I wash my fingers. Okay. Here are, where'd they go? Oh, they're behind me. This is what they look like when they have cooked. And I've used a little bit of sage as a garnish. And I really wish I could hand one to everyone to taste. I hope my husband would say that they're good. I've been making them for the family for special occasions for a while. Want to try one? Sure. Okay. My technical assistant. So these are what the sage plant looks like in the winter. The leaves are not as, they don't flush and get as big. And that will be such a refreshing, delicious, fresh thing to have on a nice morning brunch when you're taking time and relaxing and you want to really have comfort food that's good for you. The other ingredients that we talked about earlier were the beautiful beta carotene and the other nutrients that are in carrots. We talked about the beauty of the brownies and their richness and the polyphenols of the dark chocolate. We definitely talked about the delicious, I think I took the soup to the next room. We have a soup ready here, and the carrots. Can you pass me the carrot plate? Yep. So the theme is healthy comfort food, carrots as a surprise for dinner, a wonderful special treat for later, a savory and healthy breakfast treat, and a 10-minute healthy soup for those of us who really like that warm and nourishing feeling that we need in the winter. And that is it. Made it with about 6 minutes to spare.
You have, and so now's a good time. If anybody has questions, discussion, I can actually remove the spotlight. So if anybody would like to ask anything.
If you're using dried sage instead of fresh sage, how much would you use?
I think the recipe says dried sage, and it says, hold on. Where does it say it? A teaspoon. And
Oh,
I
okay,
don't
dried.
have
Okay,
fresh
thanks.
sage. I use 5 leaves of fresh and equivalent to 1 teaspoon of dried sage. And again, as I said, you will, if you make it and your family and you love it, you can add more sage or less sage as desired, as appeals to you.
Mhm.
Taking a sip of water. My daughter insists that I never ever use any straws ever again because they are environmentally problematic. So I have to wash this straw with soap and water every day.
Excuse me, if I wanted to make the turkey meatballs with the apples as opposed to sausages, is there anything you would change? How would you change?
Just a matter of the shape. And when you're cooking them, probably, you're trying to brown the sides more evenly as opposed to one side and flip over. You might even want to use breadcrumbs or ground oatmeal when you're making a meatball because it binds it a bit more. Some recipes would have you add an egg, again, for binding.
I think the apples will make it moist, right?
Yeah,
And sweet.
I don't think I think they do. They give you when you bite into it, it's not just a chewy meat, but you get a little soft thing there too. I don't think it makes it smushy as in wet.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Okay, well, 2 people say thank you, and they wouldn't plan on using the recipes. Somebody asked here, Frank, can one use 2/3 cups of white sugar in the brownies instead of the molasses and brown sugar?
Yes. All right. I think the last time I made brownies from scratch, and by the way, I would also add walnuts, anything that makes your brownie, pop for you. I'm pretty sure I used white sugar, but I think the different brownie, black bean brownie recipes that I've seen in different cookbooks and online might be using the brown sugar just to push the flavor a bit more because black beans, not to mask it, but to complement it. But it's amazing. You would never, if I walked up behind you and said, can you guess what's in these beans? Of course, that's a trick question, but I don't think you would say there was pureed beans. Any more questions? Who's gonna come over and help me clean up? No answers.
All right, well.
No, I'm gonna try your brownies for my granddaughter because she loves brownies. So I'm gonna try the black bean brownies for her, see how she likes it.
Okay, now you shall all see, none of these take a long time. Of course, I put my ingredients on one tray so they would all be accessible. But even measuring them out is really just a flash. You can just, really knock them out if you have an oven and a bowl, and hopefully, my food processor is also about 40 years old. I mean, I keep my stuff forever.
One last question. Could you recommend a book since I'm just starting to do more plant-based and I want a good beginning book for more ideas?
I probably can. I tell you what, if you stay tuned to the RSS website with the campaign to do plant-based eating, there will be lots of resources that are going to be included there. Barbara, can you back me up on that?
I realized I forgot when I made the introduction, we were talking about the series. If you're interested, you can email us at info@rssny.org we will send you information with a link to sign up. And they will be giving out recipes and all sorts of things for you to, take away and really to use.
Okay, thanks.
And the best part of plant-based is that it isn't that you have to completely square off of anything that starts with an animal. It's more about the proportion of our plate should be at least 75% plants. And then if you want, 25% something that's a critter. And that could be egg, or it could be a chicken breast, or it could be, turkey sausage.
Okay,
If we looked at a typical plate for a restaurant, or what all of us, want to feel we're being generous when we serve, we usually put a bigger amount of meat on there. And I always say, if I walked out to Broadway and I asked random people, what are you going to have for dinner? I mean, other than the chance of having the duck, they always mention the dead animal, right? They always say, I think I'll have some chicken, or I'm going to have steak, or I'm going to have a burger. The mind doesn't automatically go to, maybe I'll have a vegetable soup, and then put some of the other stuff there. So that's what the plant-based promotion is, to kind of bring it back to the forward part of your plate, and not so much the after that.